Welcome to our very first edition of RIT Reviews. Within these reviews, as the name suggests, we are going to be reviewing particular books. The idea is if you particularly like the review, then you might want to go on and read the book in full. First book we're going to be looking at is a book that we've mentioned before in our teaching and learning newsletter, and that's a book called How Children Succeed by Paul Tough. Paul Tough is, within his research, looking at the idea about how we can reduce the gap between our most higher achieving pupils and those that are achieving the lowest. He argues within his work that if we can develop a range of character traits in our youngsters, then we are able to narrow the gap. Many of our youngsters, unfortunately, are subject to adverse childhood experiences. These experiences can have a massive impact on the health and well-being, not only through their time at school, but also throughout the course of their whole lives. If a child is subject to adverse childhood experiences, and there are a huge range of these, then they can end up with disrupted neurodevelopment, social, emotional and cognitive impairment, an adoption of health risk behaviours. These are behaviours that are not only harmful to themselves but also to those around them. This could then lead on to disease, disability and social problems in later life. And unfortunately, the research suggests that those youngsters that have been subjected to adverse childhood experiences have a much shorter life expectancy due to the aforementioned problems. Tough argues that if we can skill our children in a range of character traits, then we can reduce the risks of these adverse childhood experiences. He talks very much about us as educators developing and supporting our learners to develop tools of their mind. These are tools that they're able to use not only within their schooling but also within their day-to-day lives in order to be able to cope with life and to be able to have the best opportunities they can as they move through school onto the world of work and beyond. He bases his work very much on the 7 key character traits, which has come out of the work of somebody called Peterson. And Peterson argues that if we can develop these 7 key character traits in our youngsters, then we are giving them the best chance possible. First trait is that of self-control. Tough talks about in his book an experiment that was done with marshmallows. And within the experiment, pupils were told that they could eat a marshmallow now, or if they waited, then they could have more marshmallows and greater reward. And the reason behind this is that if we can teach our pupils self-control and motivation, then they can achieve better. They can see the long-term goal and they're much more motivated to be waiting. Again, there's research around a military test on coding, and it said that if those taking the test could see what the long-term gain was, i.e. they're able to get into the military, then they are able to achieve much more. So the first character trait is very much about self-control and obviously the links to motivation. Next character trait that he talks about is grit. The idea that we teach our learners that when things get tricky, that they persevere, they keep going, they don't give up, and that actually if we can develop grit within our learners, then we are helping them to be able to deal with any problems that life throws up against them. Next character trait is that of zest. The idea of really being enthusiastic, wanting to learn, wanting to get better. And again, if we can develop this zest for learning and generally for life, then we are giving our learners the skills to be able to have the best chance possible. The next character trait is social intelligence, that of being aware of what other people are thinking and being able to deal with other people. In the big wide world, we come across a range of people, and the idea is if we can be tuned in to what they're feeling and why people might have particular views, and we're able to get on with people, then we're going to be much more successful. The next character trait which is mentioned is gratitude, the idea that we are grateful for the opportunities we're given. We're thankful and we take every opportunity that we possibly have. Next character trait is that of optimism. If we can develop within our learners the idea of being glass half full rather than glass half empty, then we are being able to make sure that our pupils have always got a positive attitude to what they're doing. Next character trait is curiosity, trying to develop that curiosity in the curriculum, to be able to ask questions, not just to sit there and be empty vessels that the teacher pours all that information in, that our learners are asking questions, they're interested about what they're learning, and they can see the purpose of how this is going to affect them and influence them in the big wide world outside. Tough within his work talks very much about balance, about making sure that you have a balance between the social character skills such as inclusion, tolerance and diversity, as well as those of character strength, which we've just mentioned. The idea is if you can get a balance between these, then you're going to be able to lead a much more successful life. Tough mentions about money, the idea that in a lot of his research it found that more affluent parents are more likely to indulge their children in poor behaviour and shield them away from knocks. That actually this can cause other issues as they are shielded away from character growth. So although his work was very much about the most socially deprived and those learners that had adverse childhood experiences, Tough very much argues that it can be the case with maybe some of our more affluent families, in that they are not allowing their learners, their children, to be able to develop the character growth that are going to help them in the very best way they can moving forward. Tough talks about, with character education, that it's not about increasing the ceiling for learners, but it's about reducing the depth of the floor, that actually you're moving up that start point, that base for learners, that actually you're giving everybody more of an equal starting point, and then everybody can then try and move towards the ceiling to be able to achieve the very maximum possible that they are able to achieve. Tough talks about creating the right types of learners. He talks about optimists versus pessimists. The idea that actually sometimes we can create very optimistic learners, which makes them feel really good, but actually our learners then are so optimistic that they can't see an end product and they feel good all the time, but sometimes they're prone to giving up. On the opposite, we can have pessimists where actually they think about all the negatives. It's about they put in barriers in their way, and again they don't achieve because there are too many blockages and they give up. Tough talks about mental contrasting, the idea of trying to create learners that sit somewhere between the optimists and pessimists. They're not so optimistic that everything's going to be great, that when something bad comes along they can't deal with it. And on the other hand, we're not creating pessimists where everything's so terrible that our learners don't even start in the first place. By having mental contrasting, then you're thinking about both the end goal, you're being optimistic, but you're also considering the barriers from the pessimist side and how you might overcome them. And actually by creating this middle ground, we're able to see a clear goal, but able to deal with the barriers along the way which we might face. Tough links his work to that of Dweck and growth mindset, and the idea that character can be movable, that actually we're not fixed in our mindset, we can grow and we can change, and by giving character skills we're able to give our learners the very best opportunity to be able to move forward and be able to achieve the very best that they can. This is a really interesting book if you're interested in character development, and actually gives a very persuasive argument that actually in order to give all of our learners, whether the most socially and economically deprived, right up to our most affluent pupils that we might see as being given all the opportunities, by developing character education amongst these learners, we can give them the very best opportunities both now and in their future lives. If you have been interested by this review, then please go out and feel free to have a read of How Children Succeed by Paul Tough.